assembled that roster.
Right, so we're not small. That's how it gets done, right?
Right.
Doesn't matter if you did it, but if you're in charge at that moment in time,
Yeah.
you're high.
Fall on your sword, that's it.
Yeah. I'll be brave enough to say it.
Excuse me? Are we on Zoom yet?
That's what I'm saying.
Burn, there we go.
How long have you been here?
It's 3 months this week.
You don't get the right to say that you don't like or love it when there's nobody in the audience. You don't get that. 10 years, you can say that.
All right, well, you know, let's see, I get 90 days. 90 days strong, baby. 90 days strong. Got another 90 to go. Maybe it's Eric that's on.
Yes.
How are you? Oh. Behind it, there's a-
No.
Okay, well, it was Andy Lawrence and Greg.
I sent you, hang on a second.
When'd you send it?
The other day. What a, hang on a second. It should be the,
We solved it.
let me see. Let me go to sent. And there it is. Oh yeah, here we go.
Colin.
Paramedics, Andy Lawrence and Nate DeCento. And the dispatcher was Rebecca Biddle.
Last thing I got from you was 5-4.
There you go, right there. Jonathan. Yesterday.
Can you try and send it again?
Yeah.
Because
Let me do a forward. There's full message. Alan,
Like on like a civil rights.
that's you.
I mean, a non.
And
Angel 3 Levy Court.
Yep. Is it an iPhone?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so is mine. Cover it down. That's good. All right, it was off. Let me record. If it's loud. Anyway, so I guess my suggestion was if you provide me with some time frames that you're available, I'll work it out where I'll get those three together and.
So a couple of years ago,
Hey, how are you?
See, good.
Father's Day.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
Did you get it?
No.
And we got called IT. So,
It says provider names, is that it?
yep. That's it.
Okay, just came across.
How are you, Mr. Sweeney? Heard anything on Mr. Williams? Have you heard anything on Williams? Neither.
Hey.
I saw where his daughter just graduated from the University of Delaware.
Yes, Eric's.
I would highly doubt.
Last week that everybody signed.
I understand Detroit's not happy that she didn't get voted back on the board. Over 2-1. Almost
7
3-1.
o'clock.
Well, you know, she did it herself though.
There's 4 here. There's 4. Oh, yeah, 4. I forgot to count myself. Count 4. Where's the 4th one? Is it all right? Oh, yeah, me.
I'm not one. Daughter, right?
Here comes the other 2.
Different, but,
See, I don't get any of that nonsense.
so, but I like them both, is what I can tell you. I feel strongly both ways. Eric, yes.
Welcome to Kent County Levy Court, our Tuesday, June 7th, 2022 committee meeting. This is in 555 Bay Road, Dover, Delaware, and Levy Court Chambers, room 203. Before we officially open the meeting, I'll turn this over to the county administrator, and he'll explain how one can join us via WebEx or via phone. Mr. County Administrator, turn over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President. Yes, welcome everyone, and welcome to our visitors via WebEx. If you are joining us via WebEx, this is a committee meeting, and we have a published agenda. There are locations on the agenda for public comment, and if you would wish to address Levy Court at those times, just so a few brief instructions here. We'd ask that you keep your devices on mute through the meeting, and if you're ready to make a public comment, *3 on your mobile phone will raise an electronic hand, and we'll be able to recognize you and bring you into the room. And if you're on a computer, your screen should have a raise hand icon that you can activate at that time for the same purpose. Anyone making public comments during the public comment segments of our committee meetings should precede their comments by stating their name and address for the record. This is not sworn testimony, but we do ask that for the record you state your name and address. We'll repeat these instructions at the appropriate times throughout the meeting. As a committee meeting of Levy Court, we're following the Levy Court adopted rules of procedure for committee meetings along with the Mason's Rules of Order. Mr. President, back to you.
Thank you. We do have 6 commissioners present and the county administrator. Commissioner Hall did notify me that he is sick. He did not indicate whether or not he'd be joining us by phone. So if he did, I'm sure he will chime in. But the first item on the agenda is Public Safety Committee. Mr. Hall happens to be chair, so Mr. Angel, you'll handle that, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Colin Faulkner, Chief of Public Safety.
Good evening, Commissioners. Before you should have a change order request for our Westover or West Kent County substation. This will be change order number 3. There is an AIA document attached. Change order has been reviewed and approved by staff, including the county administrator. The change order has 3 parts to it. The first one is an oil interceptor and installation. We had that moved from the, it was originally inside the building. We had it moved to the outside of the building. That costing is $12,416, and the abandonment of the old septic system was $1,245. Then we had some additional vinyl fencing that was added, and that was $2,238. So the totals of the change order is $15,899. So the new contract sum then would be $1,129,557, and there is a proposed motion for the commissioners.
Any questions for Colin? Commissioner Maston.
Probably a dumb question, but I have to ask, what is an oil interceptor and what does it do?
It's the gunk that comes off the trucks and stuff like that, and it goes into a, like a catch, what's it called, like a catch basin or something, and then it filter. Yeah,
okay.
Filter.
All right, thank you.
For the trucks when they're parked in the garage.
Okay, understood. Thanks.
Any other questions?
Maybe just
Watson?
And if this is something that extends it or complicates things, I don't want to know. You know what? No, not just one. I'll talk to you about it later. Okay. It's not that big a deal, okay, but it might drag on. So I'll talk to you about it when we're done.
Anybody else? Move it forward for business meeting consent. 6 up, 1 absent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Colin.
Any public comments on this item? Any public comments? Nobody online, Mark? Turn back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you. The Administration Committee, Mr. Angel, continue.
Thank you, sir. Office chairs, Sam Vasquez.
Good evening, Commissioners.
Good evening.
Good evening.
So we put a package together referring to the office chairs. We've done an assessment here in the facility of condition assessment of the office chairs here. We brought several chairs over with us 16 years ago, Knoll chairs that are still in the building. They're in very poor condition. And the following packet includes replacement chairs for those Knoll chairs. So currently, right now, we've got the Leap and Leap Plus chairs here that we purchased, I don't know, a few years back, Mike?
About 5 years ago.
About 5 years ago. They've held up real well. We did an assessment of them as well. There's only been one chair that had a defect. 90 chairs, I believe, was in that purchase back then. So those have fared well. So we're looking at replacing the old Knoll chairs with the new steel case leap chairs that have failed well for us. So we're looking at $118,201.20, and that's coming out of the Special Capital Projects Facilities Upgrade and Equipment Fund. Any questions on that?
Questions for Mr. Sam?
Just one.
Oh, Mr. President?
Glenn, go ahead.
Page 4 beauty, go ahead.
Oh, gotcha. What seems to be the main factor that wears these chairs? I mean, is it the construction of them, it's the materials the seats are made of, or all above?
I think it's just age. You know, you have 20 years on,
Where?
16 here, it's been about 20 years since they were purchased, so
Yeah.
they're definitely in need of replacement.
Okay, yeah, I just wonder if there's anything specific that would or wore out first.
Yeah, we know the armrests on these go, we're constantly reupholstering and,
Yeah.
testings are going on them, they're very uncomfortable.
Gotcha.
They look just terrible.
They look terrible.
Mr. Howe?
Yeah, assuming these were replacement chairs, right? What do you do with the old ones?
Well, we'd like to put them on gov deals.
Your house?
I've already got some. I've got plenty of chairs in my house, but how many we talked about? I forgot.
90?
Cheapers.
75?
75 leap and 15 leap
15.
plus.
I mean, what do you do ordinarily when you get rid of something like that?
Be gov deals, we'll put them on gov deals and see
Okay. All right, just curious.
what we can get for them.
Okay, good.
Any further questions for Sam? No. Move it forward to the business meeting.
Consent?
Next up, one absent, and on
Consent?
consent.
Great.
And any public comments? Any public comments? Mark? Nope. Okay, next item, 457. Thank you, Sam. Administrative expenses and auto enroll, Mr. Cuela.
Evening, Commissioners, Chairman Angel.
Good evening.
So, Commissioners may recall, about a year ago, we had gone through an RFP process, and a RFP administrator was selected, and that was ICMA RC, which has been the plan administrator since 1986. They've now rebranded to Mission Square. That's the same company, new name. And as we've been going through the process of the new format, we obviously have been incurring administrative expenses. And we had not really worked out how those administrative expenses would be raised. And I took it back to the Pension Review Committee recently. Actually, they've been talking about it for a couple of meetings. And they have recommended to the Levy Court that the county absorb that expense. It's about $8,000, and what occurs for that is the consultant, which you also selected about a year ago, Siegel Marco, the consultants for the pension plan. They do a review of performance and make a report, an update, and ultimately, if one of the providers are not performing up to par, they would help find a new fund manager in the 457 account. So the recommendation of the Pension Review Committee is that the county absorb that expense. Obviously, we're after the budget, so that would become a regular annual expense in the personnel budget if you adopt the motion. And for the upcoming year, it would just come out of the contingency fund. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Cuela? None? Nope. Any public comments on this item? Any public comments? Anybody online, Mark? Nope. Okay, thank you, Mr. Cuela. Move this forward to the business meeting consensus. 6 up, 1 absent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Alan?
Okay, ARPA grant, nonprofit service providers, Gina.
Mr. Chair, while Gina's preparing, just a real brief synopsis. you recall back May 10th, last month, Gina was with us and we talked about the framework for a nonprofit grant program. And this was based on the results of our prioritization exercise that we did in April. And there were 4 nonprofit areas that rose to the surface, and those were senior service, senior centers, homelessness and food banks, services for youth and children, and services for the disabled community. And so when we met on the 10th, we talked about framing up a grant program for those specific areas. And that same night, you did allocate a total of $8 million to fund a grant program for those specific services. And so tonight, Gina's here to share with you the design of a grant program and how it would work, the schedule that will be involved in launching it and concluding it. And just as a primer, I just want to say that. Also in your cover memo, there's a motion. If you like what you hear tonight, I would ask that you consider this motion adopting the grant program so that we can launch it with a target date on or before August 1st. Gina, take it away.
Why, thank you. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So tonight I'll give you an overview of the at-risk nonprofit program, what it's intended to do, a little bit around the funding that Mike just mentioned, eligibility, an explanation of how we've divvied it up between 2 programs for loss recovery and capital improvement, discuss program caps, which one of which will be new from last time, general program parameters, documentation, a few other features, schedule, and then give you a status of where we are with the overall funding of the $35 million. So the at-risk nonprofits program is intended to be available for nonprofit organizations serving seniors, homeless, children and youth, and disabled, around assisting these service providers to respond to the impacts suffered by the COVID-19 pandemic. Very high level, but important hallmarks in the overall structure that flows from this. As you recall, $2 million in each one of those service areas as a place to start, treating each service area sort of equally at the outset. It would be your option to add additional funds depending upon demand if that occurred, and to reallocate among the different service areas if you got increased demand in one and a little lesser in others. These are the 4 service areas defined a little more in a little more detail. I'm not going to read through those, but essentially we're looking at each of the sort of vulnerable populations here, services provided to them, in some cases transit, food assistance, counseling and supports, programs around each of these, and in the case of disabled, educational as well as employment assistance. As I stated, not to be too technical about the state and local financial recovery funds, the SLFRF, ARPA dollars, but you really want to design sort of one program, one set of uses per expenditure category, and that kind of goes deep down into the reporting. But there's a reason here why we've sort of got 2 components in 2 sub-programs. So loss recovery is a real standard among programs, really looking at decreased revenues as a result of the pandemic, fundraising and such, and increased costs. On the capital improvement side, the CCI side, that's really around building, constructing, expanding physical facilities, and has a little bit of different set of characteristics and criteria. Again, both responding to the pandemic, and again, as well, the top bullet point for each around missions that are serving those one or more of those 4 service areas. And the COVID loss recovery program, we considered how to manage the funds, how to think about the applications that may come in, some of the characteristics of the nonprofits, and felt that it made some sense to put a cap on that of $100,000. That cap makes available, up to 20 applicants, taking in the $2 million, not considering capital improvement, but at least 20, if not more, because not everyone will max that cap. And then under capital improvement is the same as we had presented last time. Makes some sense to cap construction projects at $500K or less, and up to 50% of project cost, whichever is less. Important component here, an individual nonprofit can take advantage of both sides of these 2 programs. So a little drill down into the loss recovery. Sorry, the version up here, and I'm thinking through these slides, is an initial version, so I may have to improvise a smidge here little later in the slides. At any rate, eligible costs, some familiar territory. You might think decreased revenues from the host of kinds of fundraising events that they may have planned or could not hold. So anything that was recurring, that was canceled or reduced participation, new fundraising events that they had to cancel, general fundraising activities, and also here in reduced funding from public and governmental sources also may be a consideration with nonprofit organization. And then on the increased side, the same kinds of PPE and cleaning expenses, utilities, materials, social distancing that was needed, overtime pay, but also just plain the increased staffing to provide services. In some of these nonprofit organizations, they may have been responding to multiple increased service delivery needs and had increased staffing costs resulting. Finally, offset funding, a component of the funding requires a look at any funding that had been received from other governmental sources, and in particular for ARPA, that those don't give the appearance or the actual duplication of sort of paying for the same thing twice. So these funds can exist side by side so long as they're not paying for the same things. So we would take a look at that, and if anything needed to be reduced in the application amount, that would be considered. Okay. Again, comparison of pre-pandemic 2019, and including, 2020 was the really bad year, 2021 recovery, but still financial hits to these organizations, so including both, again, comparing back to 2019 as the base year, and there's our funding cap again. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the application, but just to kind of, follow down the path of, into a little bit of detail, a little bit of weeds here. What we would be, looking, this is a program out of, so to speak, the main dollars of the county's state and local financial recovery funds. I'm going to talk about the county's revenue loss in a little bit, but this requires the same level of documentation as you've heard us talk about, the same level of audit standards applied to funds and how they will be viewed when audit does occur. So bank statements, these sort of third-party underlying objective sources of information to corroborate the lost revenues, increased costs. Bills, receipts, invoices, credit card statements if it's relevant, cancel checks, but contracts, letters from governmental funding sources, utility bills and payroll, and as well this attestations in certain circumstances. We have been mining the information, the guidance, the circulars, the auditing information, and it's considerable, to try to find ways to infuse flexibility. And one of the components of the ARPA funding in SLFRF is a recognition on the part of the federal government that in regular disaster circumstances, a lot of times the recipient that's affected knows what the process will be. And so there's a level of requirement of documentation and saving of receipts and things of this nature. Here in the pandemic, we haven't experienced a pandemic before, and no one knew that there were going to be CARES Act and additional funds and batches and ARPA. And so the federal government kind of recognizes that there could not have been that foresight back in 2020 to save and record and document. And so it leaves a little bit of flexibility for attestations. An entity, its management, its accounting firm or its treasurer, providing an attestation that these costs indeed are correct, that they, payroll or something of this nature is the example that's used most frequently. So while you can't do it for the whole program in specific circumstances, specific instances, that's a nice flexibility to be able to bring the program forward. Okay, enough here on that slide. Turning to the capital improvement program, so this is your bricks and mortar one. This is pretty similar to what we provided last time. It really kind of stood the test of the evaluation and the program development. So a project responding to the public health and negative economic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. You've seen this many times. It's the kind of the high level overarching principle in ARPA from which programs hang. In these cases with capital improvement projects, U.S. Treasury is a little careful here in recognizing that a lot of funds can be utilized very quickly in capital projects. And so there's a couple of components here that I'm going to talk about, but one is this direct correlation between the project and what it's intending to improve. So some misnomers out there that, oh, there's a lot of money out there and you got a capital project. Okay, but it has to be related to the pandemic. It has to be addressing an issue related to the pandemic. It also must be reasonably proportional to the pandemic impact identified. So again, that recognition around dollars being spent. and it also must be reasonably designed to benefit the impacted population. We created this program around U.S. Treasury's enumerated uses, which is a much longer list than this, but these are the ones that are relevant to the 4 subject areas, the 4 service areas around this program. So, to pause on that for a moment. Same as I've discussed, the funding cap there. A couple of caveats and components around this that we thought made some sense. So looking towards prospective work. So this is not intended to be a reimbursement for work performed. And the hallmark that we set that at is from the date of application. So costs anticipated after the date of application. There needs to be, and it's pretty important, a very clear and bright line expectation that the project will be completed before the ARPA funds closure date of 12/31/2026. That means open and performing its primary function. So that determination you'll see in another slide here in a moment will play out in some documentation. One of those aspects is all of the funding for the project secured? Are all other sources available? One of the great challenges in doing a capital project is your capital stack. How are you going to fund this? And so projects that don't have all funds in, and perhaps this is filling a gap or supporting, they stand to have a longer development time frame. And so this program is for projects, is really kind of being conservative here, projects that are have a full capital stack except for these dollars. Procurement, an important component and encouraged here. They are, as nonprofit, in technical terms here in the funding, they are, these entities would be considered beneficiaries. And so while good procurement processes are important, they are not a standard. So a nonprofit that's building, a wing on its facility to address a COVID aspect or impact probably went through a bid process, but they wouldn't have to go to the high standard of the federal procurement process. This component, this last couple of bullets here, really addresses something specific, really kind of quoting a little bit of chapter and verse out of the funding source. And that any project, this would be total project cost, not the amount of funds being committed. So the cap is at $500K anyway. But a project that has a total project cost, a capital cost of $1 million or greater, really needs a justification on how it is related and reasonably proportional to the pandemic issue identified and reasonably designed to benefit the impacted population. So here, a lot of this documentation around the capital improvement project is getting towards an expectation of reasonable assessment that the project can be completed by December 31, 2026. So we're really looking at a lot of aspects here from development budget, site control, site plans, site design, also, contracts, permits, its own development schedule, funding source letters, you get the idea. This is not, by asking for these things and, site plans and drawings and permits and things like this, we're not doing a technical review of, is everything on the drawing? Is the permit, correct? Is it, does it have any issues? It's really an assistance to help understand where they are in the development process and kind of identifying what might be hurdles or challenges that the project could face that could significantly impact the development schedule. Again, here, our friend, the attestation, and invoices, purchase orders and such from construction or design. So that is that documentation. What we will produce and be the sort of full set of resources for applicants, program description akin to what you received in your packet, probably with a little more detail on process. An online application. So we think that the applicants will be considerable enough that it warrants the investment in time to create an online application. And it also really helps in the ease of management of documents and application process. An application supplement, just good information to support the application. Frequently asked questions, which we will, will be a live document, a growing and living document. Likely a user guide, just so people have a place to go to ask some simple questions, to get some simple answers to the online application. It will be built to be as intuitive as we can make it and as simple as we can make it, but sometimes that's a good resource document. Right before launch, hold an information session. We'll provide the PowerPoint and the recording of the information session for that meeting, and then launch the next day. So we anticipate a few things here. I've addressed the online application. We would devote 3 to 4 staff. We've already identified those folks. Collaborative approach, questions back and forth, support submitting an application, whatever is needed. Although do anticipate that nonprofits, being grant managers and federal and local and state governmental managers are fairly well equipped to be able to respond and work with this application. Anticipated processing time. Once we receive a completed application, so this is the question. Once a completed application is submitted, so there's lots of back and forth. We're not waiting for additional documents, or we're not waiting for questions to be answered. It's substantially complete. We think it'll be approximately a 3-week time period for review and preparation, review by the county, and we do suggest presentation to the Levy Court, perhaps the administration committee, perhaps to the regular court, or you always have the option to delegate that to county staff, however you would like. We think that time frame for when an application is completed to when it gets to, on the decision docket, whether it's staff or the Levy Court, that would be 3 weeks. And like I say, we'll aim to make that even quicker. We think maybe 100 applications would come in. It's 4 service areas. These are, significant populations. So it may be somewhere in there. And then here is our schedule. So there's a lot more detail behind this, but we're anticipating launching the 28th with the information session the night before, having a 3-month application process or application period, during which we would not wait until the end. We would do rolling approvals as applications are completed. We have a couple of key hallmarks. We really need to get cracking on this. June 20th, create or finalize an application questions and requirements document for a county review. Begin working on the invitation, the outreach announcement for the information session, and then continue with the documents and beta or development of the online application and beta testing. A little internal staff training, and a lot of back and forth to get here. This is a pretty darn aggressive schedule, but we think this is doable. We have a lot of, we have some of our homework already done, so we think that we can get here. I think. Well, let me pause it here and see if there are any questions. The next is just going to give you a status on where we are in relation to other funding.
Commissioner Sweeney?
Thanks, Commissioner Angel. So, Gina or Mike, is there any other process after this is done that they have to go through on the county side to write a check?
Well, Gina alluded to toward the end of her presentation there. That's a detail that we wanted to kind of hammer out here. If Levy Court wanted to see every grant come through and be approved, voted on, that's one path. What we've been doing, like with the chamber program, is you allocated the money, you approved the program, and the staff has been reviewing it. And once we arrive at a place where the check is ready to be cut, we cut it. It gets signed and put in the mail or put in an envelope and delivered. So, and those don't come back to you. You've already kind of approved it. The chamber will be coming back at the end with a report to let you know how it performed. In this case, because this will be our program, we probably would be giving you a report monthly. There's a 3-month period there, and we would give you periodic updates if either way, how you want to handle it. But the scheduling before Levy Court could add a little time to the process. That's the only.
Yeah, I'm not interested in that.
Not interested in that.
Rather just move it on.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Buxton?
All right, tell me about the application process. I think I get it now. There's a application process where it's open and applications are received. They're collected, and then once there's a deadline, is that deadline, the first one's the 22nd, you'll start to decide which ones are qualified and which ones are getting funding? Or is that the 28th when that happens?
Yeah, we'll start the program on the 28th of July. And the proposed period is 3 months that the application would be available to any eligible applicants.
I guess what I had stated before, and I want to make sure it happens to the best of our ability, is that folks who are just learning of this have the same opportunity as folks that learned about this, I guess, last year, to get in line and be on time and not get cut out of the mix.
Yep. Yes, there's a battery of folks that provided letters and that group. What we're anticipating in this, invitations and announcements for the information session, we feel a sort of full court press advertising makes some sense. I'm not suggesting necessarily, paid on billboards, but on websites, social media, tapping networks, tapping relationships. Dana is a great source. to get the word out about the program, because that's the last thing we want to have. Oh, we didn't know about it.
No, I'm sure that the ones that were in early, I have no ill will against them, as long as the ones that were here not late, they're not late, there was just no application process,
Right.
are treated equally and have the equal opportunity to get an application in to access the funds that are available.
Yeah.
And what I wouldn't want to see is obviously that a lot of the funds get used up early, and then someone who, quote, wasn't early cut out. So I have no problems with an opening date. I have no problems with a closing date, and I have no problems with folks that miss those dates. It is what it is. I think there has to be all. So if that's where we're set up, that's fine. The next question is, I think something useful, or a question that's asked from me is, I understand the recovery process, but the capital improvement process, examples of what might be covered. So I'll just, how about a roof? We need a new roof. Not covered, not sure.
Just by need a new roof? Probably not.
I need a new roof because it's leaking, which pushes all the people into the same room, which causes the air to be bad.
That might be.
Well, then that's what we need to coach the need to coach the folks that we're trying to help.
Right.
Because at the end of the day, this is monopoly money. Let's help them. Let's figure out a way to get them. Let's not, keep it complicated. How about need a new unit, central air unit?
That's actually one of the uses that's specifically identified, because air quality being a real consideration for all manner.
In the cheat sheet, if that's not articulated, some examples of potential capital uses would be helpful.
It sure would. I think that's a really, really good point. What I sort of mentioned is a misnomer out there is, people have a capital project and that, there's a lot of funding out there. And so they sort of, that math works. And really, there has to be a justification to a relation to the pandemic, an impact, a specific impact that occurred, and how that project is being, addresses that. And it's harder for capital projects because they are big dollar amounts. So there is also a level of impact that you want to make sure is there and addressed. And we'll tease that out a little bit more in examples, trying to give, what's a small impact and a big size project. That's not the best mix. So try to elucidate those. But that's a great idea with examples. And as well, to your first point, if there are organizations that specifically should be reached to, and you want to provide those to us, we welcome that. I think that will be important in communication and outreach. So the people who should know about the programs do.
The for-profit program, not taking too much time, do you expect a significant amount of money to be left over? Have we made a decision on if we're going to reallocate that back into the pool?
I think the county's still doing the last approvals.
Yep.
There definitely will be leftover money, and it's...
Consideration to go back out? Because the deadline closed, so anyone that didn't apply,
That would be something the Levy Court would have to determine.
Okay. Because I think that there are some folks now that potentially maybe didn't take advantage of it that would like to now. They better understand it. They see what it's done for some of their neighbors. I would love to see us extend it rather than give more. I'm not saying we should, but give more to ones that have already accessed it. I'd first like to see us extend it.
Spread it further.
Yeah, and allow some folks to come back into the game that missed the first opportunity. That's possible. I know we're going to decide that, but I just want to put it out.
Yeah.
Cool.
All righty.
Any further questions?
No.
I'd like to pose I know we've been through this process with tourism and the chamber, and as we move forward, when we get stuck on a snag where somebody's being held back or they can't get their check, that the president put together a board, 2 or 3 commissioners and the county administrator, that like an oversight that you go before them to see if we can move it forth quicker, rather than sitting there waiting to get documentation or whatever the issue may be. I'd like to see if that's possible to do that, to move it forth, because that's the only thing I'm hearing about is some people aren't getting paid. It's been a while, and so I don't want to see this process continue too. If something should happen, I'd rather be proactive than reactive. So I wanted to propose that to Levy Court and see what you all thought.
Anything to get the money out.
Yeah, I agree. Sounds good to me.
Okay.
Found a paper in my living room, actually in a pile, that was underneath this cabinet from mid-July last year. Big headline, county mapping out plan to spend ARPA funds. It was a year ago, almost.
Wow. Yep, I know.
Well,
Good.
hopefully with a good contingent of staff, and we have additional swing staff that we can put toward the program. Communication is key, and making sure that we're reaching out and chasing if it's the document that is needed, or that there's a clear understanding of what is needed. That that communication, that sort of back and forth, assistance with the application, that makes a big difference. It really does, on how the program's received and how it goes forward.
Well, I know we have caps on things. I understand why we have the cap, so we can get the money out to more qualified people so it doesn't get utilized up. So, but that's not in the interpretation of the money. That's something that we did, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, within the broad, the ARPA funding is very broad, and within ARPA, so long as, within the boundaries, there's pretty wide discretion on how you can structure, how you can cap, how you can kind of slice and dice those dollars.
Okay.
So,
Commissioner Sweeney?
We started receiving any applications from fire companies for the volunteer fire company money that we set aside?
We have not yet, but we do have something potentially to talk with you about and how to go forward there. As of this point, there were at least four that I've heard from. I mean, we had heard from others, but most recently about 4 that we're actively working and anticipating submitting very shortly.
I thought Frederica put theirs in early. Did they pull back?
Yeah, they, the person who was preparing it had a family consideration and now is back in the saddle, so it was delayed for personal reasons.
Okay. Yeah. Any further questions on this part? 'Cause we are going to get into that, so.
Into the fireman right after this or later?
Yes.
Because I want to just bring up one thing, it's rather quick, because Glenn said he wanted to go to dinner tonight, and since Alan's kicking me under the
I don't think we're gonna
That
make
wouldn't
it.
go. I can watch you eat.
Yeah. Anyway, here's my, I really wish, and I'll get a chance to talk to you guys much, but I think that we should revisit a allocation of funds to the municipalities in a percentage basis. I think it's a wise tool, a wise measuring, partnering with our municipalities that we all represent. We can use the ARPA fund to do it. I suggest 10% match. It's effective, partnering, it's not complicated. Anyway, just throwing it out there for you guys to talk about. All right, let's move on to the next one.
And we'll turn this over to Mike.
You want me to give a
Done?
little
You
thumbnail
had
on?
a couple more slides, I think.
Oh,
you wanted to
okay.
show.
Go ahead and finish, Gina. Just finish with you first, Gina.
So we just wanted to give you a little kind of update on where we are with the funding. So you know what your amount is. These are commitments to date. The Woodside project at 1.27, small business tourism, that combined is 5 million. And what the dollar amounts ultimately end up being or what else is done with those, an open question. VFAS was $3 million, at-risk nonprofits. This program that we're talking about, $8 million, and then the tentative substance abuse, or not tentative, the commitment subject to was $75K, and then the county's revenue loss standard allowance that was made available to recipients. So let me return back to this slide and just like to drill down one additional moment to how these programs are falling out in relation to at least the letters that have come in. And they really hit quite a number of areas. So just a quick reminder here, emergency service is obvious. But the senior centers, Hope Medical and affordable housing development, Dover and the Milford facility, this National Council on, or NCAL, you know, NCAL, is a recent addition. In the daycare, early learning youth, terrific proposal from United Way and those other entities there, including the Scout Reservation. And Disable from Kent Sussex Industries is a really great one there. And then in terms of the revenue loss standard allowance, these are not committed, they could be addressed under the county's dollars, and that could be the HVAC improvements, the paid sick leave and premium pay. And that leaves remaining, so the numbers here, apologies, I should have highlighted that. These numbers were your priorities and where these ended up. And so, you know, emergency was 2, you got 1, 2, 3 in these first 2 programs. 6 was on the previous page. 4 or 5, you can see what we're doing. 4, 5, 6 was on a previous page, 7 was on a previous page, 8, 9, 10, and 11. And so here in, you know, remaining that has not been addressed, not that anyone has to, but I know we've heard some real talk around this segment, and in particular DE Turf, and then Bay Health Foundation is a reasonably new addition. So let me return back to this slide. So, Jill.
Any questions for Gina? I just have one for us, is the DE Turf, the Bay Health, and the food bank. And now food bank, it could be included in one of the previous ones, but the DE Turf, which had a substantial loss, and the Bay Health program of getting their homegrown doctors started here, that program that Dr. Lindsay came through and talked to us about. I'd like to see us look at that too, get that moving forth, because that's all going to help the community, period. That's all I can say.
Infrastructure.
The infrastructure, yes. So I'd like to see us raise the eligibility on that and move it forth somewhere on this hierarchy.
So, Mike had asked us to look at these as well. We delved a bit into Bay Health to the extent that we feel comfortable that it would be eligible. And so maybe a little in the near future, you know, we may see that. DE Turf also is something that you know, we looked at in a where it could be served in, you know, sort of a variety of buckets, a variety of ways. We really feel it's best in tourism. That use of funds is one of the more flexible, being in an impacted industry, its mission, you know, it serves a lot of youth, of course, but its key mission was tourism-based. And so that gives it some considerable latitude. So we think that that's the place where it goes, and perhaps you'll see those in the near future.
And keep in mind, all those figures haven't all been spent.
Right.
So we have extra money there in reserve, kind of, sort of, that we can reallocate once we go through this process.
Some of that money
Some of that money.
won't be spent, be allocated.
Correct. So, anything else, Gina?
I think
Any
Mike-
questions for Gina?
Okay.
Mr. Pettimaj.
Gina, if you want to just join us at the table, take a load
Yeah,
off and have
come
a
here,
seat.
take a load off.
Sit down.
We wanted to talk about the volunteer fire service and their grant request. You all recall that back in the fall, November, Kent County Volunteer Firefighters Associations came before you and submitted a package of requests that they generated from their members. And then in December, they updated that request. And that's the information we've been working with. It was the submissions that they gave us in December. And we went about designing a program or process for them to make the applications. A couple weeks ago, you all appropriated $3 million to fund it. But all the while, once we explained it to the fire companies, stood up the application process, got the materials out, increasingly, and some of you probably have heard this from the fire companies you represent, it's a difficult process the way it's designed. There's a lot of documentation that's required. And our volunteer fire departments struggle to get this material together. And as you know, some have varying levels of personnel that can accomplish that task. So it's a challenge. And so we've been looking at other ways to fund their request. And there's been several looks at this. And so about a week ago, I asked Gina and her team to look again at the possibility of making a simpler process that could reduce or avoid the documentation requirements, and specifically utilizing a portion of the $10 million allocation that could be used for general government services. And the thinking here is that every year, as you all know, we give a grant to the fire company. So they're part of our budget every year. And so in a sense, they are a general service that we fund annually. And so Gina's team looked at it again and reviewed the ARPA guidance. And this Monday, we had our weekly meeting. And it was determined that we could utilize a portion of that $10 million to fund this without requiring the fire companies to go to the extent of generating all of the background documentation. They otherwise have to fund it under the requirements of CFR 200. It's more like a county money getting spent out of that $10 million as opposed to the federal allocation. Commissioner Buxton, you need to stay for this.
I'm listening.
Okay. I mean,
Yes.
this, okay, you can leave then. No, it's really important because we're trying to solve a problem. So what we have, based on what was submitted in December, if you look at it in its totality, every department gave us a request, signed by their chief, signed by their president, and that's the request. And when you total it all together, it's about $3.5 million. Now, there were a couple departments. One, Magnolia, did not file a request, period. And two, Houston and Farmington filed a request, but it was fairly small. And what we would like to recommend to Levy Court is for those three, we provide an allocation out of that $10 million that is equal in size to what their grant was in October.
Or normal grant to them.
So for example, Magnolia received $53,000 in October. We would give them another $53,000. That way they're not left out. Let me finish, Jerry. and then the rest, we would fund all of the requests that came in as they were submitted. So the total of all that would be $3.68 million. And we believe that this would alleviate a lot of pressure on the fire companies to try to come up with all the information otherwise. And it would be essentially a supplemental grant from Levy Court utilizing that general government services fund money that we have. It would still leave us over $6 million of the 10 available for other purposes. But it would expedite this grant process to the fire companies. We would probably have their money to them in July if we get buy-in for this. It's a recommendation to Levy Court. Otherwise, we're going through this very tedious application process right now.
It's not getting us anywhere as far as with the fire companies. And the other thing that this will do is it'll free up $3 million that we can put towards some of these other worthy projects, so we can spread that money further.
Right. And the way it would work if you agree to this, Susan Durham, and she's in the back, every year about this time, Susan comes in with a budget amendment to the current year budget to shore up some, areas of the budget, the current year budget, FY22. And so she was preparing to bring one forward next week for introduction, and it would be heard on the 28th, and presumably you would approve it. What we would like to do, if you concur with this approach, is we would include this into that budget amendment. So we would move part of that $10 million, $3.68 million of it, into this budget amendment, introduced next week, heard on the 28th, approved, hopefully, and then we would have the money in the FY22 budget to then prepare the checks and payment to the fire companies. That's why I said we presume we could get it done before into July, it would be early part of July.
And they could stop this process that they're trying to do now, digging up all this information to satisfy the ARPA requirements.
Yes. So, I'm sorry, Jody, I didn't mean to stop you, but that's the proposal, and we'd like to hear your reaction.
Okay. Commissioner Sweeney?
Thanks, sir. So what was the lowest amount of the December request from a fire company?
0.
Not other than the 3. Other than the 3.
The lowest other than the 3?
Yeah.
Gosh, there's 18 of them here, so I got to look down through the list.
17,300.
17,900 was from Farmington, which is one of the 3.
Right, that's one of the 3.
There was, and then 19 from Houston.
That's one of the 3.
That's one of the 3.
And 0 from.
The others were all probably north of 50,000.
So why don't we just make those 3 the same as the lowest amount of any of the companies? You're only looking at another $60,000, roughly.
I agree.
What's wrong with that? You're all willing to that money.
Do you know what I mean, Mike?
Yes, I do. And it looks to me like the lowest of the ones that, beyond those 3 was the request from American Legion Ambulance was $59,200.
To make those 3, Houston, Farmington, and Magnolia, 59.
59 too?
59 too.
They make them all 16 call it a day.
Works for me too. I mean,
16 call it a wrap.
I'm good with that too.
Because we are looking at replacing those funds with the ARPA funds eventually.
Right.
Right? So I've argued before that goal and the idea is to get the money out there. I know that Magnolia was harmed by COVID when it comes to EMS. So that would help.
I say do it.
So-
I'm on board.
So that just raises it, not a whole lot, but
Marginally.
20,000.
Somewhere in that ballpark,
Yeah.
probably. We probably would bring it up to like 3.7 million.
I'm good. Everybody,
Any questions more for Mike? Show of hands to move it forward.
Is there
for
consensus at this point, right? Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, 6 and 1 absent on that one.
Good.
Got your marching orders, Gina.
This is what happens.
Hurry up, I gotta make a phone call.
Decide not to run. They start voting their conscience.
Well, I'd just like to say thank you all, because I'm sure some of you have heard a lot from your fire companies in your district, but I've heard it from all of them. And, you know, I've heard some not so nice comments. This gets us off center, gets them paid, makes them happy. And, you know, we can move on to these other folks and get them in the process.
I think it's a heck of an idea.
Yeah, so.
So just to reiterate, we'll make the baseline for any low grant 60.
Yes.
So American Legion would go to 60 as well. Okay.
Yeah, that's better.
Now, what you may not know is Terry and I have been meeting, well, we met with Little Creek last week, and tonight we met with Little Creek in the city of Dover.
Dover, yeah.
Because they had the same issues. And Mr. Pettermage was working on a plan that we discussed with them, and they are on board with it. So they are very happy with what we're doing.
Yeah.
And Gina and Susan.
Susan, yeah.
So just to give you a heads up here too, it's not.
Well, we've been steadily working on this since we had that not so nice meeting that Eric and I attended here. And
Pitchforks.
yeah. Yeah. So I thank you all for coming on board and supporting that. And thank Mike and Gina and Susan for all their hard work and diligence in trying to find a remedy for what turned out to be a big problem.
Yeah.
So.
Great solution.
Okay, I may have jumped the gun with that one because we were talking about it, but we also have a motion for, or consensus for the Tetra Tech on what was presented before too. So I need a show of hands to put down on the agenda for next week. I don't know if it's going to be consensus because.
Just one question. We had talked a little bit about whether or not we wanted everything to come back to us for review, where we didn't do that with the hotels and the businesses. Can we agree that just get it done and get the monies out to the folks internally? Okay. That's fine.
And then, like I said, I've asked about putting together a commission with the president, with Mr. Pettermage, so that if there is something that stops or it's stuck for some reason.
Exactly.
So that we can move it forward so that it's not sitting there.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay? So that will be part of that motion too. Okay? So I need a show of hands for that for next week. 6 up, 1 absent.
Sounds good.
Any public comments on these 2 items?
Good.
Any public comments? Mark, anybody online?
Indeed.
Susan wants to say something.
I just want to say, as far as that committee you're saying to override stuff, you have to be careful with that because you can't override non-compliant things. It's federal funding.
So you can't override what?
Non-compliant.
Like if we're holding it back because we're trying to make them compliant, you guys can't override that.
Well, that should be on the form then if it's not compliant.
Well, I mean, that's what everything gets held up for. They don't get held up for any other reason except we're waiting for information. So you just can't override that. So you don't want to create a committee to say, I'm going to override the federal regulations. So.
Well, I'm sure between you and Mr. Pettermage and the committee that the president puts together, that will be discussed with Gina too. So, thank you.
Thanks.
Anybody online, Mark? Nope. Back to you, Mr. President.
Thank you. Thank you again, Gina.
Of course.
And unless anybody else has anything else they want to bring up, we can be adjourned.
Thank you.
So where are you going to eat so I can go watch you?
9.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I'm getting texts and everything else. I don't know.
But I think that works.
Interesting.
That's awesome. It's fantastic. Tell me what else works.
Thanks for using WebEx. Visit our website at www.webex.com.
I'm wondering, you know, I listen to Alexa, and I'm thinking, man, if this chick exists, I want to meet her.
No, there was,
Partner with them and then decide their fate.
trying to look across here, 49,363.
Yeah, like a city Dover's gonna get a big number.
They gave him money, right,
If you
right.
get 10%,
Okay.
they're gonna get a big number, maybe you cap.
Camden, Wyoming was a big one, that,
Everybody's in it.
it was 557.
Would have to be Mike.
The ones that have less.
We have a scanner, Mr. Jimmy's fireplace and all the calls, like, overdoses.
The minimum